Good evening and welcome to Writers Unplugged. This is a series that is a chance to hear your favorite writers or new to you writers in conversation as if you're eavesdropping on us in a coffee shop. So my name is Jen Jumba. I'm a librarian here at the main branch of Cleveland Public Library, and one of my favorite things besides reading is talking to writers. So it's an opportunity to get to know their craft, what inspires their stories, where they like to write, essentially getting to know them better and see them as human beings and not just the name on the spine of a book. So this evening, we are so lucky to have Lisa Unger joining us as a stop on her national tour to launch her latest book, The New Couple in 5B. So before we get started, a couple housekeeping notes. If you want to find out who else is visiting, both virtually and in person, go to cpl.org/unplugged. Maxback's Books on Coventry, which is our favorite independent local bookstore, is in the lobby, has copies of Lisa's books. If you haven't bought them already, you'll buy more on the way out. So a brief introduction to Lisa. Lisa is the New York Times and internationally best-selling author of 21 novels, including The New Couple in 5B, which just published on Tuesday. So like 3 days old. Yeah. Her books have been published in over 33 languages, sold millions of copies worldwide, and she is regarded as the master of suspense. She's also the co-president of the International Thriller Writers Organization. So if I were to list all the nominations and awards, we wouldn't have much time to talk. So I'm just going to highlight a few. Lisa has received 2 Edgar Award nominations in the same year. So an honor held by few, including Agatha Christie. Not too shabby. I should also mention that Edgar is awarded by her peers. She's also won the Goodreads Choice Award, which I'm sure many of us in this room have voted for her. So it doesn't matter whether she's respected among her peers or her readers, deservedly so. And I think one of my personal favorites is Sarah Michelle Gellar, who said, "I just discovered new to me author Lisa Unger, and I've been going through her works. I like her books have an underlying theme and pose a question that she argues both sides of." And specifically on the new book, Lisa Unger, you've done it again. I couldn't agree more with Sarah, and I was actually reading her latest book while I was sitting at the desk, and I think I shouted "no way" so loud that I startled my colleague, and then immediately texted you to be like, I did not see that coming. So, as you will see this evening, Lisa is more than an incredibly talented writer. She's a thoughtful human being who looks at and examines the world in a contagious curiosity wrapped in a thriller. And it's with these stories we find ourselves discussing complex issues, and even if we don't change our mind, we can't say we didn't see the other perspective. So join me in a warm welcome to best-selling author Lisa Unger. I was full too.
Okay, I got it. That's great. Thank you. I just want to say a couple things before you get started. I have a special place in my heart for libraries and for librarians. My mom was a librarian. And so libraries, I think, are like one of the most important things about our community and also about our industry. They're really like the backbone of our industry. So when people turn out to support an event like this and to support authors, you're supporting your library. And so thank you for being here. That was it.
It's awesome. Thank you. So
okay, good night. No, just kidding.
This is your latest book, The New Couple in 5B.
That's the one.
Book number 21.
Yes, that's right.
Tell me it is just as exciting as publishing your first book,
100%.
that it does not get old.
It does not get old. So I have been a writer all my life. I've been writing since I was a kid, and I never wanted to do anything else with my life. I never wanted anything else. And so I'm just really grateful that I get to do this. I get to make my living, writing stories, and that people read the stories and bring them into their hearts and into their minds. And so every time the book comes, you get the first copy before it hits the shelves, of course. And every time that book comes, I feel like a kid on Christmas morning. I do. The level of excitement and joy and just gratitude that I feel every single time a new book enters into the world. It never diminishes. It never gets old. I never take it for granted. I'm always just filled with gratitude.
I think we as readers can say the same, because every time we see a new Lisa Unger book on the shelf, we're overwhelmed with gratitude and super excited like Christmas. So Anne Lamott, I was reading Bird by Bird. She writes, when they are working on their books or their stories, their heads will spin with ideas and invention. So where did the idea and the invention for the story come from?
Yeah, so the idea for a story can come from almost anywhere. It might come from a news story, might come from a line of poetry or a photograph. In one case, it is even a piece of junk mail that was the seed for a story. So a lot of times there's like something that happens or something that I connect with, and it leads me to this like huge swath of research. And the best way I can describe it is then if that like research or the obsession I have about a certain topic connects to something deeper that's going on within me, that I'm going to hear a voice or voices, and I'm following those voices through the manuscript. So that's usually how it works for me. In the case of The New Couple in 5B, it was a little bit more of a collision of multiple things than it was sort of that usual way that a book gets born. So when I was a kid, I had an aunt. She was a very glamorous woman. She lived in New York City, and she lived in a building that is very much like the fictional building, the Windermere in The New Couple in 5B. It was a Murray Hill pre-war building with an awning and a doorman and an elevator man. And the apartment that she lived in was like this beautiful 2-bedroom apartment in Murray Hill. And it was like, for me, it was the dream apartment, like the place that you would inhabit in your dream life in New York City. And, but my aunt was like a very complicated woman. So visits to her were always really layered. And that was a piece that I kind of brought with me, like this beautiful place that you were so awed by, but that like there was always this kind of undercurrent of, something unpredictable, something dark. And so that was a piece that, I kind of brought forward with me. And then a few years ago, I had the occasion to reread Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin. And, Ira Levin is just an amazing writer, and all of his work is completely different. And Rosemary's Baby is sort of iconic, and not just the novel, but also the film that followed. And there were some pieces from that really struck me. And one of them was the fact that Rosemary did not have like any agency really. And like maybe that was the time, but she was like very much so like sort of ping-ponging between these big forces, the husband, the neighbors, the spoiler alert, like demon cult and all of that. So it was like, this kind of, character that just she seemed like such a victim in a way. And I kind of, wanted to, in a way, rewrite that. Like I wanted a character who maybe was caught in something like that, some type of building or some type of nightmare scenario, but that she in fact does have agency. And that even if there are some layers to her or some layers to her perception that may not be entirely reliable, she's not crazy. She's not somebody who doesn't know what's happening and can't save herself. So that was like sort of something that stayed with me. And so these things kind of all collided, and I started writing The New Couple in 5B.
I think that's one of my favorite things about the books that you write is you start with something that on the outside seems relatively simple.
Right.
Young couple inherits this fabulous apartment.
Right.
And then there's the nuances and the layers, and this simple thing really isn't so simple after all.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about the structure for this book?
Yes.
Because you have an overture and following acts.
Yes, that's right. So just a little bit about the book. So Chad is an actor, and Rosie is a true crime writer, and they're a young couple, and they're struggling. They're struggling to make ends meet. They're struggling to start a family, and they're just sort of, having a really hard time, and then they inherit this dream apartment, this beautiful apartment in an iconic New York building, and they think that their luck is sort of about to change, and it is, but it's just going to get worse. And so they move in, and as soon as they do, strange things start to happen. And so and it's not just their story, it's also the story of another couple who at one point lived in 5B. Right. And so we have a little bit of that piece as well. And I structured this, the story as, like sort of acts in a play, because Chad at the time of the telling of the story is an actor, and he's doing a play off Broadway.
Right.
Yeah.
The other thing I notice about your books is this also has a dual timeline, right? Because you talked about the couple that lived in 5B before Rosie and Chad. And I will say with your books, I'm constantly thrown off balance.
Good. As it should be.
As it should be, absolutely. So can you talk a little bit about Willa, who lived in the apartment?
Yeah, it's funny.
Prior to Rosie and Chad?
Yeah, so there's a young woman who we have her perspective from a different timeline, and she's a dancer, but her career has failed. And she's in a marriage with a writer who she loves, but that she is like this woman who just had these really big dreams, and she's watching them slowly kind of fade away. And her husband is a very successful novelist, and he wants to move out to the country to have a family. And she sort of, knows that that's what she should want, but she feels like it's a kind of death sentence. And she starts having an affair. And so we sort of follow her journey through the affair and what happens after that. And it's interspersed with Rosie and Chad's journey through the book. And one of them is the new couple in 5B, and one of them is the old couple in 5B.
It's the prequel.
It's the prequel, but they both lived out this very sort of connected journey in the same apartment. Right. Totally different timelines.
Totally different timelines, but there are some parallels and some similarities between these two couples. Yes. The other thing that I noticed, you introduced us to Willa and Chad and Rosie, is that the apartment building itself, the Windermere, becomes a character in and of itself.
Yeah. Yeah. So I always, this is a theme that sort of runs through my work in general. I tend to get like a little bit obsessed about places, land, houses, tunnels, under places.
I won't say how we got here.
Through a tunnel.
Some underground place.
So I feel like, we spend all this time, building shelter, right? Like that's like one of the things that we do the most of. Like we create these spaces, and they're a form of art, but they also have this function, and they are, our homes and the buildings that we create like kind of spring from the well of human nature, the need to kind of shelter ourselves and to like live our lives within a space. And these places can define us. And so I tend to think of them as holding energy. Like I've always been very interested in that idea. We've all always heard about, the haunted burial ground, or, the haunted house, or whatever that happens to be. But it's, it seems right to me that houses are like bodies, and we hold energy and we have memory. And so is it so impossible to, imagine that they do the same? And I know that you had a sort of a paranormal investigation here in the library. But yeah, so I feel that the Windermere has its own energy. It wants something. It's damaged, and I think on some level I felt all throughout the book that it wanted to heal.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that there were only certain ways that could happen.
Right.
Yeah.
So in terms of buildings holding energy, people do too, because that's one of the things you talk about is Rosie's background and the family that she grew up with.
Yes, that's right.
So will you talk a little bit about that energy that she brings with her and tries to push away at the same time?
Yeah, so this is actually another like a little bit of a nod to Rosemary's Baby. And just to be clear, I mean, they're just tiny little pieces, right, that are just kind of like a jumping off point for me to be like sort of curious about something. And there is like in the beginning of Rosemary's Baby, there's a conversation that she has with her sister. Her sister is like this very religious person. She calls and she says, the Pope is coming to town. Are you going to observe this? And, Rosemary's just like, no, I've moved away from this life and this is not my belief anymore. And so that was it. Like that was the only piece that you ever saw of Rosemary about her past and where she came from. And so for me, it was really important for Rosie to for us to be connected to her identity, to her family of origin. And so she comes from what she believes are a family of con artists and charlatans. Her father is a healer. Her mother is a tarot card reader. Her sister is what her father calls a dreamer, somebody who has prophetic dreams. And Rosie has just decided that this is not, that they are liars and that she can't get far enough away from that life. She wants to live in the real world as she thinks of it, the world of science and education and academia and writing and researching. She doesn't want to have any part of that. But for me, I feel like that is the reason why she may have been more vulnerable to the Windermere than, say, somebody else. Like if you think of the idea of like psychic ability, and I do sort of think of it this way as being like a spectrum. But if you think of psychic energy or the ability of being a psychic to be like a brain event, not like, or a psycho-spiritual event, and not necessarily something so woo-woo, but something like scientific, truly, that, we know more about space, right, than we know about our own brains. So like there are more questions, right, than there are answers. So like if she's like, so if there's a spectrum of like psychic ability or the ability to perceive the supernatural, and on the one end of the spectrum there's like people like my dad, right, who's like an engineer, and like that guy is never going to live in a haunted house, right? He's just not. Like if the lights are flickering, he's going to be like, yeah, we better call an electrician, right? But like somebody on the other end of the spectrum may perceive something completely different. They may pick up energies that, maybe they're there, maybe they're not. Maybe they're have an altered, perception that is not true, or maybe it is. And so like, that's always very interesting to me. And so I kind of felt like she was, because of where she came from, because of the, her family of origin and all of the things that happened to her in her young life, that she was actually more vulnerable to the Windermere than maybe somebody else would have been. And that it's a place that kind of attracts that type of person.
Absolutely. I think it's her dad that said, energies linger, they echo. The past and the future dwell side by side.
Yeah. Yeah, which is kind of like if you really think about it, it's sort of like a quantum physics thing.
Oh, my head hurts.
I know. It's a lot. We could get really deep. We could start talking about Schrodinger's cat, right? Or
yeah, we could.
But we don't have to. But the idea that there are multiple layers of reality, multiple layers of truth. I think when I think about like the paranormal or the supernatural, I tend to think of it in like the most Jungian way. Like Carl Jung believed in the supernatural. His mother was a medium. He had a near-death experience where he felt like he met his spirit guide, Philomel. And, that was the point where he broke from Freud, because Freud was all about the scientific method. And Carl Jung felt that the acausal event, the anomalous event, deserved to be explored, not discarded, as the scientific method would have it be discarded. So if you really think about it in that sense, like, isn't it possible that our brains are capable of more than we imagine them to be? I mean, of course it is possible. We know that.
Absolutely, it's possible.
Yeah.
I'm struck by your description of choice I think it's one of the best phrases. You know, those little phrases when you're reading a book that you just want to write down and tuck in your pocket and pull it back out and read it later. But you describe choice as a twisting helix between choice and chance.
Yeah. Life.
Sure. You know,
Yeah.
how we choose one thing, it's almost like the butterfly effect, right? We choose one thing and it sets a series of events.
Right. Or you think that, we all sort of, grow up thinking like it's the big things, right, that determine the course of our lives. But sometimes it's just the smallest thing. Where did you choose to cross the street? Did you oversleep? Did you come home early from your trip? Whatever it is, like, these are the things that maybe determine the course of your life more. And when I say that life is just like this twisting helix of choice and chance, it's like we don't always control what happens to us, but we do often control what we do with it.
Right.
And I think that there's like a comfort in that and a power in that. And that, even when you're confronted with extreme circumstances, if you can distance yourself and be present and breathe, then you can react rather than respond.
That's
or
the whole like
respond rather
emotional
than
intelligence
react.
and
Exactly.
the amygdala hijacking, where you just respond without thinking.
That's right. Or you just kind of take a beat and say, okay, what now?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The other thing that comes up in this book, in the Windermere, which is this old historic building, is the issue of privacy. Because within all these apartments, everything is voice activated. And you can say, it's almost like Siri or Alexa or whatever, but this takes it to a whole new level. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm really obsessed with privacy. I think we all should be obsessed with it. We're not, but we should be obsessed with privacy. And I'm also, and this is true of a lot of my novels, that I'm always like very interested in a certain technology. And I'm not interested necessarily in the technology itself, but in how it's rewriting the way we relate to each other. So in Last Girl Ghosted, it was online dating. In Confessions in the 745, it was social media. In Secluded Cabin Sleep 6, it was DNA testing. And when it comes to this piece within the Windermere, like the Windermere is like a very, like, in my mind, it's like this very analog building. It's like a piece of old New York, right? Like
with the elevator.
Yeah, with the elevator, the hand operated elevator, which is like a real thing in New York. There are like I think about 40 or 50 of them left in New York City. And they can't really be replaced because like they would have to like change the elevator shaft and all of that. So it's like this piece of old New York, but I wanted this other element of it, like the idea that here within this building, it's all of a sudden there are these brand new cameras, and then there's this system by which you can say, "Hey, Abby," and the doorman, who seems always to be there, the doorman answers. And Rosie is very, very concerned about privacy and about like how everybody is kind of giving it away. We've given away our privacy. I mean, we know that, right? Like every single one of us, like, how did they get us to all carry this phone, right? Like, how did they do it? We don't know, but we all have one. And it's, it's tracking literally every single thing we do. It knows everything about us. It knows things about us that we don't even know about ourselves, right? So I'm always very interested in that. And I'm always very interested in how it changes the way we relate to each other. Like, I think about my daughter who's 18, and she has never not been tracked by me since she got her smartphone at the end of 8th grade. I always know, well, I mean, to whatever extent is possible, I always know where she is. And we had an occasion where she lost her phone. We left it in an Uber, and we were like kind of tracking it to get it back. And she was supposed to go out and we were in New York City at the time, and she was supposed to go out with her friend, and they were supposed to have the afternoon to walk around on her own. And she didn't have her phone, and she was like, "Can I still go out?" I was like, "I don't know." I did let her go out, but it was a very strange thing. And that is like, it would be unthinkable a generation ago. Like my parents had no ability to track me. I mean, thank
But they
God.
still knew where I was.
They still knew
without all the technology.
Well, they didn't know everything.
No,
right?
Thank goodness.
Thank goodness. But yeah, I mean, so I'm interested in all of these things and how they, start to change the way we deal with each other and how we think about each other and how we're connected to each other. And, so that was like kind of one of the pieces that came forward into New Couple.
I'm just curious, as part of your research, did you read things by Sherry Turkle?
No.
She's been working at MIT for years and studying the impact of technology on children.
Oh.
And she wrote a book called Alone Together, Why We Expect More from Technology Than Each Other. Okay. And it speaks to that point.
Yeah.
And then she wrote a follow-up book called Reclaiming Conversation, because we've become so accustomed to using devices. Yeah. I mean, you go out to a restaurant, you'll see a family of 4 and they're all on their devices and nobody's talking to each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
And organizations and companies like Google purposefully have the lunch line timed so that you're kind of talking to people on either side of you.
Yeah.
But not to the point where you're waiting so long that you're frustrated and leave. Mm-hmm. And it ends up there's this cross communication across departments, because the person in front of you might be in marketing, the person behind you might be an engineer, and then they purposefully have small tables, no like single or deuces, anybody who ever worked in a restaurant, so that it encourages conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, it's interesting. We've been with our daughter, we've been really, really strict, with devices. Like she didn't have a smartphone until the end of 8th grade, and she only got it because she was going away to DC for like a trip with her class. And, we were really strict about screen time, and she didn't have any social media until the pandemic. Which, I mean, at which point you just had to let the kid have social media because they didn't have anything else. And I wanted her to build all those habits. Like we saw kid after kid, and it was really hard to draw those boundaries because nobody else was doing it. And we just saw kid after kid get a smartphone and then just kind of disappear into that device, and they just looked down at it, and that was it. And Ocean would say, my daughter's name is Ocean, she would say, how come nobody wants to play anymore? Nobody wants to play ponies. Nobody wants to play hide and seek. And I was like, I don't know, kid, I'll play ponies with you. I mean, like, but I got a sense of it really early on, like when she had her iPad and I let her play a few things as she got older. Like Animal Jam. I don't know if anybody knows what that is, but it was like a thing that all the kids were playing. And I was listening to her and her friend, just kind of talking and like doing this game together. And I could hear them go like, oh, I got this. Oh, I got this diamond. Oh, this. I was like, you know what? That's dopamine.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, that's a dopamine hit every single time. I was like, we're going to be limiting this extremely. And we're also going to sit down and talk about addiction. I'm sorry, I know you're only 6, but we need to start. My poor daughter, the conversations she's been forced to have. But like these are things I think we need to talk about now with our kids. It's like, it's the new frontier of parenting, for sure.
And I think it's really interesting that you have this technology in this old building, and it's not a house where you're kind of isolated. Right. But when you're in an apartment building, you run into other people on your floor, in the elevator, in the laundry room, other common areas in an apartment building. Yeah. So the juxtaposition between the two, I find really interesting.
Yeah, and the old and the new, these like sort of dank back doorways, and then there's the elevator where the doorman is. And it's like, if anybody's lived in New York City or a city where there's a doorman building, that there's like a real loss of privacy that comes from having somebody like basically track your movements, like us, like he knows when you come, when you go, what kind of packages you're getting and stuff like that. So there's something like a little bit, it's a little, it's like an old school kind of, surveillance thing.
Yes. Yeah. On one hand, it can be incredibly comforting knowing that we're looking out for one another.
Exactly.
On the flip side,
right,
it can become kind of creepy.
Sure. Well, that's true of any.
It's a Lisa Unger book, after all.
That's true of any technology, right? It's like there's always a benefit to it, but like, what's the cost, right? And we're not very good at looking at the cost.
And the thing that's interesting in your books is that when you talk about those things, they're not mutually exclusive.
No.
That somehow there's, a harmony between the two, that you can find that sweet spot where, you can still use technology and at the same time still be able to connect to other human beings.
Right. And we talk, like, if you think about like the Amish, for example, there's this idea that they don't use any technology, and that's not really true. They spend time deciding what the cost is of using that technology. What does it take away in comparison to what does it give us? And, I think as a culture, we have not been good about asking those questions. Like, if it's convenient, if it makes things easier, if it's cheaper, then yeah, okay, we'll do it.
Yeah, I rarely say like, oh, it's going to be harder. Okay, I'll do it. It's going to cost more. Okay, I'm in.
Right.
I mean, we typically don't do that.
And then later on, we start to see the effects of it.
Right.
Yeah.
If only we knew.
If only.
You talk a little bit about the building being cursed, and do you think people can be cursed?
Yeah.
Thinking about the characters in this book.
Yeah, I think that people have like an ability to attach to things in a way that can be harmful. And it might be a place, it might be an idea, it might be a person. In a way, it's a lot like addiction. When you talk about like, when you're in a relationship with somebody and maybe that person is your spouse, and maybe that person, or maybe it's the building that you live in, or maybe it's your family of origin, there's this inability sometimes to see things for what they really are. And that we create a fiction of, what we want someone to be or what we want someplace to be. And then we act from that place rather than what's really there. And so that was something that I thought about for Rosie, like the idea of like, she's really clinging to this idea that she wants a family. Like, she's estranged from her family and she feels that rift very profoundly. And she and Chad are trying to create something, and they have a fantasy of what that means, of what that's going to look like. And so they're very invested in that. And when she moves into the Windermere, she feels like she can see her future there. Mm-hmm. And so I think maybe she makes herself more vulnerable because of what she wants from the building than maybe she would have otherwise.
Right. I'm just thinking about the line in the book that says, because in the end, that's what our lives are. Stories we tell ourselves and each other, and those stories are all that remain after we're gone.
That's right. And she's, so Rosie's a true crime writer. And so that's what she does, is that she kind of digs into the past, and she's digging into the past of the Windermere to try to understand what's happened there and why. And is there such a thing as a haunted place, or is it just the evil that men do and women do to each other and to ourselves? And is there, are there some places that are like a vortex that attract negative energy or attract positive energy? And so those are, what she's really doing in her career is trying to create and give voice to stories, to people that, their stories haven't been told. And so that's a big feature of her character.
Absolutely. Yeah. The other big feature in the book is truth.
Yes.
And lies, and lies by omission, so it becomes a little bit even more complicated.
Yeah, what we don't tell each other.
Right.
Yeah.
Or if you're married to an actor, how do you believe if they're trained to portray a character?
That's right.
Are they portraying a character to you, or is that too meta?
No, I don't think it's meta at all. Okay. I mean, I think we're all playing a character to a certain degree. Like, I think that everybody has multiple selves. There's the public self, there's the intimate self, the self that we show to our friends and our family, and then there's the private self that's known only to us. And, some people are operating, a really big distance between those things. Like, what they're showing the world is very different from what they are in private. And, I think that sometimes you can be in a relationship with somebody like that and really not know what's actually there. And that might be true of, a friendship or a spouse or your family of origin, or, even like in Rosie's case, like she's so angry at her family and what they did to her, that she doesn't maybe see them completely for how they are either. And that is a journey that she has to take. So
yeah, it's sometimes when you put your experience up against somebody else that reflects back what that experience was, which is always an opportunity to learn.
Right. And then when you've created a sort of a fiction for somebody in your life, and then you're forced to, confront that, or sometimes you maybe even see glimpses of it, but you shut those hints away as well, because once you see it, then you have to do something about it. Right. It's your responsibility.
It is your responsibility. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think humans are complex, right? And I think that's what you do so well in your books, is capture us and our complexities that make us human, right? And there's a line, we can be both dark and light, sadness and joy, and they dwell side by side in everything.
Yeah, and I think that's true. And like I think in my books, you're not going to find your villain, your totally bad character and your totally good character. And a lot of my heroes have, very deep flaws, and a lot of my, most murderous and addled and addicted people have redeeming qualities as well. And I think that's the truth of life, that there aren't that many real true heroes or real true villains in life. That, some of us make good choices most of the time, and some of us make bad choices most of the time, but most of us are making some combination of good and bad choices. And having empathy for that, I think, allows me to like sort of dive a little deeper into character, because I want to understand all the layers of the people in my books.
And I think that's what you do, is you help us to understand why somebody does what they do. It's not just what did they do, but it's the why did they do. Which is ultimately just as fascinating.
That's what fascinates me. Like we can all, read a newspaper and see all the evil that people do to each other. I mean, it's right in our face all the time. But when you really, and I think that there's some idea that when you sit down and really ask the question, why did this happen, that you're actually making excuses or, not focusing on punishment or whatever it is. But I think that diving into that understanding of people and what makes them do what they do, it helps us all, because the more we know and the more empathy we have, the more we can, create positive systems and, and educate and reform.
Yeah. It ultimately comes back to choice, right? And choosing to connect with people.
Yes.
And to be authentic. Right.
I think so. Okay. We agree on that. Yeah.
Not much else, but yes, I'm kidding. So we're going to start to wrap up so that you all can ask questions.
Yeah.
But the final 5 questions.
Oh, yeah. Final 5. Like
for you,
maybe like a speed round or something. Okay. All right. Okay. I'm not good
start
at this,
the clock.
But go for it. Go ahead.
Okay. What's the best part of being on book tour?
Oh, you.
Wrong answer.
The best part of being on book tour is actually talking to, well, first of all, librarians. Just to say, the librarians are the only people who are as geekily into story and character as writers are. Like they're into it. They're like seriously into it. So that's really cool. Connecting with booksellers, hanging out with readers, talking about the book, because a lot of times I write the book and I'm so in it for so long, like I'm in that world for a year, and I write without an outline. So the story is evolving for me on the page the way it does for you, and I'm so deep inside of it that it's only now when I come out on the road and start talking about it that I actually know what it's about, right? Like that I can actually say, oh yeah, this is what I was trying to do. This is why I was here. This is what I was interested in. And so talking about it to readers is really kind of a joy, because, they lock us in a room, writers, and we're just like,
no windows.
That's right. No windows. No, I mean, truly though, we're all pretty much,
you're very deliberate with your writing space.
Right. And I am. Oh, very much so. Yeah.
Like there's no technology.
No, well, there is, but it's just on a separate device. I have my computer on my desktop is where I write, and there's no internet, no email. Well, there is an ability to connect to email because I have to send things, but I don't go on email on that box. And so just very, very careful about that space. And most writers are, we're introverts. If we weren't, we would not be able to do what we do because it's a tremendous amount of time, like sort of on your own. And then they like let you go out into the world and see people and talk to people and wave and smile and do all that good stuff.
Please ignore the writer in their natural habitat. Yeah, I got you.
So that's really my favorite thing.
Have you ever gone to a psychic or tarot card reader?
Yeah, of course.
Seriously.
Yeah.
And they say you would come to Cleveland to talk about a new couple.
Yeah, I've always had a lot of interest in tarot cards, and the occult and the supernatural, and so I've done a ton of research on all of that. And I've had really interesting experience with psychics, and I think I saw a ghost once, and so I've always been really fascinated by these things. So lots of research on that. Yeah, for sure.
Interesting. You're a writer, so when you go to text people, do you text type or type incomplete sentences?
Oh, complete sentences. Yeah, of course.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Of course. Yeah.
And does it bother you when everybody else uses text talk?
No, it doesn't. I mean, it's like, it's interesting because it's kind of a vernacular. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And like, so there, and I have a teenager, which is great because I have a friend who's a writer. I have a lot of writer friends, but Kate White, who is a novelist and also the former editor-in-chief of Cosmopolitan magazine. It's great to have her as a friend. Like there's a lot of advice that she can give that no one else can give. But one of the things that she talks about is having a reverse mentor. And that means like having somebody who's younger than you in your life to keep you current, so you don't like calcify. And so my daughter really is like my reverse mentor. And I really love, the way language evolves. Like I love the way words evolve and how like text speak starts to become like how we talk to each other and like all of that. And so that for me, that's like a thrilling thing to watch language changing so quickly, right? So quickly. And the way we communicate with each other, and just certain things like things that my daughter will say to me, like she will be like, "Oh, he sent me the thumbs up and not a heart." I'm like, "Okay." She's like, "But the heart was the default choice, so he had to like choose the thumbs up." I'm like, really? She's like, yeah. So it meant something. I'm like, you know what? You're right. It did. Yeah. Because it does. It's like, it means something. And so, just that kind of nuance of language. Like I was interviewed at one point by, I was like some podcast or something. And she was like a little bit snooty with me about like how much texting would take place in my book. And she was like, well, isn't that, kind of like cheating? I was like, no, I mean, this is the way people speak to each other now. To not acknowledge that in your work is to not be current, it's inauthentic to imagine that people are speaking to each other in a way that they're not. And it's like, it says so much about a character, how they text or why they didn't text,
or why they did a thumbs up versus
did a thumbs up versus a heart. Right. I mean, these things, it matters. Meaning is everywhere. Mm-hmm. That was a long answer to it. Short. Okay. This was supposed to be the speed round. Okay.
If you could only listen to one band or singer for the rest of your life, who would it be?
David Bowie.
Good choice. Yeah. What is something you would say to your younger self?
I had this question earlier this week, and I think I think I arrived at a pretty good answer. So when I was a kid, I knew I wanted to be a writer, and my dad, he was an engineer. My mom was a librarian. When I was sort of asked the question, "Can I do this?" my dad's answer was like, "No." Don't do that. It's not a real job. People don't write for a living, and it's an extremely bad idea. So please get a real job when you graduate from college. And I was like, oh, okay. So like, not surprisingly, when I graduated from college, I like didn't have the confidence to really pursue my dreams, even though I had already started my first novel by the time I was 19. And so I did the next best thing, the next closest thing, and I went into publishing. And I worked in publishing for 10 years while I was like kind of a closet writer, like writing in the nooks and crannies of my life, and it took me all that time to go, hey, wait a minute. This is a real job. There's an entire industry set up around people who write. And I think maybe I need to be doing this, that I can be doing this, and I should be doing this. And I think what I would have told my younger self was, sometimes you have to listen to your own voice first. Fair. and more fervently than you listen to the other voices. So I think that might be my advice. Listen to your own voice.
Absolutely. This has been delightful. So I want to kind of finish with something that Anne Lamott said, that all my life I felt there was something magical about people who could get into other people's minds and skin, who could take people like me out of ourselves and then take them back to ourselves. And I think that's what you do with each one of your books that you write.
Thank you.
Quite welcome. So thank you. We're going to do questions in a second. But thank you for all of you who are here this evening and those listening. And thank you to our tech team and facilities department, to Max Bax Books, who has copies of Lisa's books for sale. And then a huge thank you to my dear friend Lisa Unger for stopping here at Cleveland Public Library on her new Couple in 5B tour. I'm Jen Jumbo with Writers Unplugged. Thank you and happy reading.